do it, and then I break it down, and then I don't look at it for a few months, and then when we hang it here, I kind of get reintroduced to it, so that's nice. I was inspired, I guess, by the world that we live in right now, you know, and the crisis that everybody is in. I mean, I guess I can only do so much, and that's pretty much how everybody feels right now. But, I mean, if somebody started throwing rocks at a giant skyscraper or something, I might go out there with them. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like making is like existential crisis all the time. If you're too comfortable, you're probably not doing anything good. How's this gonna work? Is it gonna work? I doubt that it's gonna work. Then it's okay, and then you just go, fuck it, man, I'm just gonna put it out there anyways, you know what I mean? Because, yeah, you're never going to be happy with what you do. Or maybe, I think there are people, though, that are happy with what they do. Or, like, excited, think that they've done the best thing ever all the time, you know? I think there are people like that. But I don't think it's me. I'm definitely, like, probably one of the more negative people around. I grew up in Seattle, Washington. My brother and I, my parents lived in a bed and breakfast when we were growing up. I painted in the laundry room. Next to all the guests, they'd be coming down and doing their laundry with quarters in our machine, and I'd be painting there. The situation in our house was always like this kind of like bohemian thing where art and theater groups and everything would come to the place. So, I mean, I'd been exposed to that kind of world for as long as I know, you know?
I suppose a lot of the situation was certainly non-traditional, but also there was a kind of richness to it. I mean, my mother is like a very interesting character in a way, and the kind of complexities that she presented in her life were things that we had to deal with and kind of were almost like a gift in some sense.
I was an artistic Joan Benet Ramsey. My mom had like kind of ambitions, I think, you know, in like making me into an artist. There was this kind of reward system that was set up, and like I'd paint little landscapes and flowers and stuff, you know, with real pastels and like lots of color and everything, and the whole house was probably full of probably 100, 200 or 300 of paintings of mine, just like everywhere, you know, and they were all just these kind of like sappy pastel paintings and stuff.
Oh, well, there's a watercolor up there. I mean, like a finger painting thing. That's really old. I mean, he must have been like 6 when he did that. My father framed that one. Yeah, it's way up in the corner. An abstract. These landscapes were done in 1989 and 1988. These were in that show at Everett Community College, and also there was a show at the Unitarian Church in Seattle. They gave him a one-man show.
I mean, I had art shows when I was like, 15 or something. I was really into it. I dropped out of middle school. Well, actually in 7th grade, I started going to 3 classes during the day, and then first day of high school, I dropped out of high school and just would stay home and do art. And then I eventually went to college, right out of that first year of high school. I think she helped me out a lot, actually, when encouraging me,
He just would draw whenever he had a chance, and we always had pencils and paints and crayons around, and he picked them up and did whatever he liked, and he seemed really good at it. It was like he'd had lots of art lessons. And he just kept painting on his own. I think everything he saw inspired him to try something else.
He had a need to learn, that's for sure. He was also, in a way, driven by his mother. You know, she was a ballerina, and then I think no one on earth is as driven as a ballerina. And it was, in one way or another, communicated to him. And he had a great ability to focus and to do a series of paintings, not one little experiment, but a dozen experiments in the same vein, and then on to something else, and a dozen more experiments. They produced a body of work at a very young age.
To me, the early paintings, they seem like an extension of my mother in a sense. You know, so maybe that's something he's working back against in, you know, later as the work is developing.
I went to this Cornish college in Seattle, Washington, and then after a year of that, I quit that and went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York, when I think I was maybe 17, 18. When I went to Brooklyn, like, the wheels kind of fell off me. It was like the early 90s, you know, in Brooklyn, and we lived right next to Myrtle Avenue, which was pretty kind of rough area, you know? Like, you'd walk down the street and you'd see just weird shit. Like, your friends would all be like jacked, you know, coming off the subways. It was a bad neighborhood. Like, the street scenes and everything are literally scenes from when I was living in Brooklyn, you know? Like, I saw some guy like that had his head shot, you know what I mean? He was like sitting in a car with shot in the head. I felt like some sense of fear, I think, at that point, you know? Like, overwhelming sense of fear. I was kind of just on a run, you know? So, like, I was over school, I guess, kind of at the point where teachers would be asking me why I was, like, always so fucked up in class and, like, miserable. Started being on a methadone program out there. It's just, like, 2 years straight of being strung out. And then I eventually had to go back to Seattle for a while, chill out, move back with my family.
I remember him calling me from New York and being very, very frank with me about it, being like, this is the situation I've gotten myself into, and I need to try to get out of it. I need to come back to, like, I'm gonna come back to Seattle and I'm gonna just, like, you know, regroup in a sense. We lived together, but I had a roommate who was this, like, guy who was maybe, like, 19 and a college student, was friends with my brother and me from a long time ago, and I think my mother started having an affair with him, I think maybe to kind of endear herself back into like our lives or something. But it was this, like, you know, it's this situation where you come home and there's like an oyster shell and a bunch of cinnamon burning in it, and you're like, okay, like, who am I fucking living here with? And they're like fucking my mother.
Yeah, Seattle was like the most depressing thing in the world. I never wanted to go back to my family again, you know? It's just chaotic at that point. I was clean for like a year or something, and then I moved down to San Diego and started back over again, doing drugs again. My brother, like, was skateboarding, and then he kind of moved down there because he was thinking about going pro, and then he was living down there, and he said, hey, you should come down here. And that's when I started doing skateboards. Like, I sent a bunch of, like, my artwork down there, and just Polaroid photos. And Todd Swank, the guy that owns those companies, he hired me to come down there and start drawing skateboards for them.
At that point, he was an amazing illustrator. You know, he wanted to do stuff that was like gonna be edgy or make people think, you know, and he just was no holds barred, had no discretion about it, and would come out with new stuff like all the time. Like once a month, there'd be like new stuff coming out.
It's nice to think that you get paid to draw skateboards, or draw, you know. And then I was a skateboarder, so being in that world was kind of fun. It was devious, and we were like troublemaking and stuff, so it was fun. Good old days.
I consider him, he was a big part and pretty important into those early days and what we ended up growing into in the future. He's an artist and he does what he does because that's what drives him.
It was like 5 years of just being totally strung out or whatever on top of like the time from before that. And I mean, I probably went to like 20 rehabs and I stopped doing skateboards and like, you know, it sucked. I mean, I got married, I got divorced, I was constantly in the hospital because I was getting these like infections, and you think, wow, it could never get worse than this, and then the next day it does. And the next day it gets even worse than that, you know? We just stopped the car on just like a hill and we were fucking, you know, shooting up or whatever. And the cops just rolled up, you know, and fucking busted us. And I mean, it was just like the day's worth of drugs, you know what I mean, for me. But like, I guess if you get arrested with like cocaine and heroin, it's kind of, I don't know, it seems like a big deal or something, you know? Like, the police were bummed on me. They sent me to jail for like, I stayed in jail for like a month or something. And then they sent me to a sober treatment place.
I mean, some of like the rehab stories were crazy. He's sharing a room with this guy who was shackled to the bed, and there was like a state trooper outside, and this guy was like sitting cross-legged on the edge of his bed, and he'd rub his temples and he'd look at my brother and tell him he was gonna rape him with his mind bolts. You know, it's like intense. But there's also humor in it, you know, it's like so fucking absurd.
I don't want to sound like I'm avoiding the period, but I don't know what to say, and I don't feel that, to just be honest with you, that sort of thing doesn't make anybody stronger. There's a myth that hardship and tragic experiences makes good artists. I disagree with that completely. It wears you down. No one needs to go through it. I've been through tons of it myself. It's totally not necessary. He's bounced back pretty well. I'm amazed physically at how healthy he is. I also think he loves having children.
I'm mad at you. That's what Aubrey said the other day. I'm mad at you because you have to go to work. Which is strange because he's 3, you know? Because he thinks work is fun. He thinks basically like he's missing out on drawing or like working with some kind of tool or something, you know? It's all about fun, you know, and learning stuff for him. It's not like, oh, what a drag, I have to go to fucking work, you know? For me, being creative isn't like, oh, I got a great idea, just throw it down, you know? Or I've got a moment of inspiration. It's literally, okay, I've got 40 hours to spend on a drawing, and it's as good as the amount of time that you actually put into it. It's not this kind of epiphany thing where you just come up with some kind of inspiration. It's about just putting in the hours, and good stuff comes out of that. I think most of it is just doing what you think is right on a gut level, you know? And taking risks.
You're either actively living or you're actively dying. Yeah, I'd say this piece right here is probably my favorite piece. It's really psychological.
The meaning is always kind of like flexible, you know? The work can be about completely different things to different people, and it's always interesting to see how people respond to the work. It's a union of artist and viewer, in a way.
it's beautifully made, the craft is incredible, but my response to it is more on like an emotional level. It's just the feeling I have when I'm standing in front of like this kind of massive landscape. But I think he was kind of just itching for some other way of communicating. I think it's dangerous to get too comfortable, you know. I think that you stop sort of getting what you want out of making work.
Last year and a half or so, you know, I did all that work was basically the same kind of, it was working within like a theme. And I'm okay with that. But then it just has to evolve, I think. Because if it doesn't evolve, then it just becomes, I mean, for me at least, it's boring. You can't paint the same thing forever.
You know, some people like want you to make art that's like prescriptive, that like offers some kind of like a positive model of how people should live their lives or something, you know, like I think Cleon's work is much more like dystopic in a way and functions as a kind of negative model in a sense, you know, it's full of complexity and antagonism and ambivalence and all these different kind of conflicting desires and positions.
You know, you work on it and work on it, work on it, and then by the end of it, you're like, fuck, I hate this stuff because like I'm just sick of it, you know what I mean? And then, you know, 2 weeks later or 2 months later after you've hung the show and it's in the gallery and you look at it again and you think, well, actually I like that stuff, you know? It grew on me. It's like life, you know, like you never have complete perspective of where you're at when you're there. As time goes on, things kind of become clearer.